good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our seminar today. Today we'll be discussing Turkey's new role in South Asia. Well, I'm very happy to welcome Professor Murat Aswan. Professor Aswan is currently Associate Professor at Hasan Kalyoncu University and a researcher at SETA Foundation in Turkey. He's interested primarily in Turkish foreign policy, in the Middle East, in security studies, intelligence, defense, conflict resolution. He also served as a Turkish officer for years, and he has been deployed in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Bosnia, so he has kind of very rich experience, and this allows him to bring together theory and practice. He has also published extensively on Turkish foreign policy and conflict resolution, including on Afghanistan. And we are very happy that he will be able to kind of help us understand the unknown in some ways, but very important and growingly important role of Turkey in South Asia. So, as many of you probably know, Turkey has had a very kind of glorious history in South Asia, going back to the 16th and 17th century, including military forays during the period of Sultan Selim. They partnered with the Gujarat Sultanate, with the Mughal Empire. So there was a very substantial historical interaction. And obviously, Turkey played a role in the domestic politics of India at the beginning of the 20th century, especially after Kemal Atatürk abolished the caliphate. This prompted the so-called Khilafat movement within British India. But for the last several decades, Turkey has not played a very major role in the region until very recently. However, in the last several years, we see a much more active Turkish position, for example, on the Kashmir dispute. Turkey has strongly supported Pakistan's position on this. It also supported Pakistan during the recent conflict last year between India and Pakistan. It supported it with intelligence, with military hardware, with political support, and of course, Turkey also has reached out to other South Asian countries, such as the Maldives, such as Bangladesh, even Nepal a little bit. In a certain sense, it's the new major actor, external actor in the region. But of course, this has also created a certain pushback against Turkey. You can see it very clearly in the fact that India has tried to kind of counteract this Turkish influence in the region by reaching out to Cyprus, to Greece, to Armenia. Actually, very recently, India actually announced an industrial defense agreement to co-produce with Athens. So there is kind of a countervailing action in India's part against this kind of Turkish influence in South Asia. So how much Turkey, will be able to sustain its influence in South Asia? What are the constraints? What are the opportunities it has? What is the role of the Turkish defense industry in this? What is the economic connection between Turkey and South Asia beyond defense? All these very complex questions. I hope that Professor Aswan will be able to kind of help us understand better. So,
thank you so much for invitation, dear Ivan. And also, thanks for coming, sir, dear guests. First of all, I'm so sorry for my dress code because I will leave back, because I'm traveling back home right after this workshop. So that's why I'm with short sleeves in here. Sorry for this. The topic is really interesting for me, and I was not expecting an invitation, but, it was good for me at least to express a Turkish perspective. First of all, let me delineate one thing, please. I'm also a member of SETA Foundation, a think tank in Turkey. And we are in touch with both Indians and Pakistanis and also Afghanistan. Last week, we hosted a delegation from Afghanistan, a Taliban delegation. It was 2 or 3 months ago, we hosted a Pakistani delegation, and just 1 month period, an Indian delegation, 27 professors and diplomats. So once you are engaging directly with differing delegations, well, it's easy to understand the moods, inclinations, intentions, etc. So I will try to pass my observation and also the Turkish position. On the other hand, I think we should first scrutinize the Turkish foreign policy in general, because otherwise we can't examine exactly how Turkey is engaging with the others, including the countries at the South Asian region. In this sense, the Turkish foreign policy for the last 22 years, well, it has changed a lot. Why? If you go to 1980s, 1990s, the internal political polarization, economic devastations. I remember 1994 economic collapse, for instance. 2001 was another economic escalation. And remember 1980s were an economic collapse of the globe because of this 1973 oil embargo on all countries because of Palestinian issue. So the Turkish foreign policy in 80s and 90s always designed for more economic and trade engagement with the other countries, at least to recover these economic devastations. On the other hand, right after 1990s, and please be aware of one thing, internal politics is important to understand the foreign policy. 1990s were a coalition period for Turkey. That means 3-4 political parties formed up coalitions, and they were alive like 1 year, 2 years, etc. And in each time they changed the minister. There was a different minister with different ideological background. The most stable period was Ismail Cem, one of the leftists in Turkey, because he was really an intellectual and he started an engagement with Greece or the other countries constructive. In this sense, 2000, 2001 was again another escalation, political escalation. We experienced 2001 economic collapse and think that it was a constitution crisis, the media advertises, because once Prime Minister Ecevit and then President Necdet Sezer was discussing the situation in Turkey, the president just threw the constitution to the face of Prime Minister, and the government collapsed, and think that we had to start from scratch again. So each economic collapse and political crisis in Turkey brings a new government. So AK Party is a product of this crisis. I mean, that's very clear. And once Erdogan established the government, it was 2002, think that there was a great concern in the region. It was the US intention to intervene in Iraq, and think that Turkey and the United States bargained for 1.5 years on how to proceed the Iraqi intervention, and the parliament rejected it. Actually, the decision was more than half, but there had to be a qualified decision. So the number of votes did not qualify for a decision in the parliament. So whatever happened, the AK Party government started a new foreign policy. At the very beginning, I divided in 2 terms, by the way. The first term is about Davutoğlu. I mean, he was the foreign minister and then prime minister, as you remember. And Davutoğlu pursued zero problem with neighbors policy. And his book was very famous, Strategic Depth. It was rather constructive, but the criticism, on him was about being an utopian. Because at that time, Turkish-Armenian relations, Turkish-Syrian relations, Turkish-Greek relations, relations with the United States, by the way, had ups and downs, great ups and downs, and think that even though you pursue a policy for a zero problem, the other party did have an agenda, and it collapsed. When? The first thing was the Arab Spring, and especially the revolution in Syria. And then what happened? Right after 2016, the July 15th coup attempt, there was a great transformation, great transformation in foreign policy of Turkey that also addressed how to engage to the South Asian countries or the other countries. Why? Okay, just remember, please, 2012, it was Gezi incidents. It was a protest wave in Istanbul. 2013 and 14, there was a great crack between these Gulenists and the government because government stopped their revenue by an educational reform. And then they were at the polling sites, and then we experienced 2015 PKK wave of terrorism in the city centers of southeastern provinces and districts. And 2016, July 15th, it was a trauma because think that the Gulenists who had organized themselves in army, well, they started a coup and they failed, and think that it was a trauma in the minds of not politicians but also the public. So what happened? Turkey started a different mood of foreign policy. Turkey had always preferred a passive defense. It was an action and reaction strategy. Once somebody's do something, Turkey was reacting. It was defensive and passive defense, taking just measures. The only exception, well, it was about Turkish-Greek relations. 1974 was a great challenge. On the other hand, please just remember, it was about the Greek agenda of then, especially right after the coup d'etat in Cyprus and also Greece. And they were targeting the Turks living on the island. On the other hand, the second was the Kardak crisis. Kardak is an isle, not island. There are only goats living on it. And they erected a Greek flag, so Turkey reacted. But 2016 changed this defensive posture to active defense. On the other hand, there was a new form of engagement in the region. It was what? If the threat is perceived as existential, Turkey started aggressive foreign policy and also military interventions. The best sample case is Syria and PKK terrorism. Either in Iraq or Syria, PKK was based, with different organizations because PYD, PKK, PYPG, or PCDK in Iraq or PJAK in Iran, they all are the same organization actually. So it was based on aggressive response or a preemptive strike on the terrorist cells based in these countries. But the July 15th coup attempt coincided another thing really important that changed the overall policy again. It was what? Syria is perceived as a location that the external powers, because president circulated as it is, designing a new order in the Middle East, unfavoring Turkey. He was designating a new territorialization, especially for not Kurds but PKK, because Kurds are different, because Turkey is totally against equating Kurds and Turks, PKK. In this sense, they started military intervention. Okay, right after this issue, I will not extend, there are a lot of details because the Turkish foreign policy was designed, first of all, on the basis of balancing all the powers. Why? Well, once something happened in the region, in the vicinity of Turkey, all global powers are over there. In Syria, we had the United States, Russia, and Iran. Think about Caucasus. Once Azerbaijani, Armenian incidents erupted, well, Russia has always been there. And the EU and the USA was providing support in the name of Minsk Group. And think that once something happens, they were diplomatically or politically intervening. Balkans, the same. In this sense, Turkey had to start a balancing strategy on its own terms, not that much inspired from this Hans J. Morgenthau's, balance of power strategy, but it was a strategic balancing effort that the incidents, events in the region that Turkey perceives as a risk or threat, Turkey had a strategic autonomy. What does that mean? Build your own capabilities and capacity. You know, these are different, as you may know. Capability is much more solid and tangible. Capacity is about planning, coordinating, or diplomatic activities. So Turkey started this new wave of building capacity and capability in the region, either through military terms or politically. The second thing, economy was still important. Turkey started engagements with all parties with a new approach. Well, if you are able, be discriminate in terms of identifying the problems that requires cooperation and competition. For instance, Russia and Turkey both confronted in Syria and Libya. On the other hand, cooperated. Turkey and the United States confronted a lot, especially in Syria, but had to cooperate because we both are, NATO members. So Turkey started this strategy. It doesn't mean that you are all broken once you have a problem. You can continue with the existing area of cooperations, but discuss whatever you have a dispute, you know. Another issue was about, maybe inspired from the Russian case, fight and talk. Fight and talk means what? We were fighting with Russians and Iranians in Syrian theater, in Libyan theater, but indirectly, by the way. On the other hand, Putin and Erdogan was able to speak to each other. And if there could be a technical discussion on how to resolve a problem, mostly low-level delegations of both countries at the ministry level could not agree on anything, but they were the presidents agree and resolve it. Well, this effort inspired another one, is facilitation and mediation. Because if you go through the conflict resolution literature, the one who mediates and facilitates always gains more. Because this party mediating or facilitating will have initiative and will at least prevent the clauses in a potential agreement that will harm your interest. So that's why Turkey started this effort, facilitation and mediation, with intelligence diplomacy. If the other party does have a dispute with Turkey, like Turkey and Israel, Turkey started intelligence diplomacy that was under strict secrecy, and they discussed frankly on how to manage the crisis. This applies on Turkish-Israeli relations. Turkish-Greek relations are a bit different, but Turkish intelligence played a great role in at least managing the problems with the other countries that Turkey had disputes. And for sure, another issue is very important. It's strategic passions, I believe. What is strategic passions? Once you are in Syria and dealing with a country like Russia, you must wait and observe all factors, all dynamics, all actors, and when conditions moderate, proceeds, then you can act. That's why Turkey is not fast in reactions. Waits, observes, shapes, and then acts gradually. And it applies to Turkish-Afghan case briefly, because once Taliban, boosted the Ashraf Ghani's government, I think that still Turkey pursues a gradual engagement policy with Taliban. And normalization waves is another thing. That means if you have a problem with another country, like Egypt or the UAE or Saudi Arabia, and if you alienate them, they are building a bloc easily. Because Turkey is a huge country, I mean, in terms of military and capabilities, a huge country. And the energy bloc in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea was an alarming bell, so that's why Turkey started the normalization policy to prevent the blocks in the region. And achieved. Now, Turkey and Egypt, they normalized, or Emirates, there's a high-level interaction. But please, let me just conclude the Turkish foreign policy discussion with one very important topic. There's a reality. I drafted this concept in my book chapter and in one of my articles, even though it's in Turkish. Turkey pursues three regions and three seas policy right now. And the first and second area of interest policy. It's what? The first belt is surrounding the Turkey, surrounding it. Starting from Balkans up until Caucasus, Middle East. And these are the three regions Turkey is actively engaging. And three seas, the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. In this sense, whatever happens in the first area of interest, Turkey is active because there's a saying of President Erdogan, if you are not sitting with the others on the table, well, you're on the menu. You are a prey. You are being served. So that's why Turkey pursues a very interactive diplomacy. If the problem is in the first area of interest, the first belt of area of interest. And I have a list here. I will not tell them in details, but Turkey does have a lot of concerns and engagements. The number is 30 in the meantime. So the Turkish Foreign Ministry is engaging with the problems like terrorism, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. And I will not tell them all. The Black Sea security, Gulf policy, etc. The number is 30, and it's a huge list. And each of them are complicated. Think that if somebody's claim anything against Turkey, it's actually not the priority list of Turkish Foreign Ministry. Greeks, for instance. For sure, there are a lot of problems, but Turkish priority list have Greeks like maybe 15, 20, I don't know. Not on the top 5. So under the realities of Turkish geography, then we have to evaluate the South Asia. For sure, South Asia is not priority for Turkish Foreign Ministry or Turkish presidential policies. Why? Because a lot is happening very existential in the very close vicinity of Turkey. Think that now Turkey is very concerned about the developments in Syria. Up until the last month, we were discussing if there could be a territorialization for PYD, YPG at the east of Euphrates River. It's existential for Turkey because it will start a domino effect in the region. Another issue is Russian-Ukraine war, especially the Black Sea security, because Turkey has discovered a great reserve of natural gas in the Black Sea, and the processing this natural gas is really important for energy security, other than the newly discovered oil reserves at the southeast. You see, energy is related to security, especially from the north and south. Why? The oil reserve discovered in the Şırnak city is heavily related to terror threat because PKK had threatened this region before. So terror-free Turkey project of Erdogan, he calls it as it is important to process this wealth and contribute it to the Turkish economy. So let's go back to Central Asia, not to extend the foreign policy explanation of Turkey. So if South Asia is not priority, what's the strategy? What's the Turkish perspective? Well, we can have countries individually or all countries in the same basket. Whatever, Turkey started Asia Anew policy. Asia Anew. Well, this policy, the targeted audience, the targeted states or societies, well, South Asia and Far East Asia. not Russia or Central Asia. It's different. And it's purely focusing on what economic and trade interactions with the countries in this region. And that's why Turkey is sending delegations just to search for the opportunities and facilitate Turkish businessmen to build a link with the markets of this country. For instance, yesterday I was in Mustafa Center of Singapore, and the products were mainly made in China or made in India. Well, there were Turkish products on the shelves, and it was 1/3 price, by the way. I don't know why. So it was interesting. I purchased some because 3 times more I should pay in Turkey. It's interesting. And they are selling. So that's the main cause of this Asia and EU policy. On the other hand, we must be aware of one another thing. The motivation of either Turkey or the countries in this region are totally interlinked and based on historical and emotional senses, emotional motivations. The first thing is, let me tell you, for instance, Afghanistan first. Once you go to the years 1100, 1200s, there was a great wave coming from South Asia and also Central Asia, immigrating from this region to Konya City. Mevlana, for instance, is from Afghanistan, Balkh City. We Turks and Afghans do share one common icon, Nasreddin Hoca. Maybe you know him. Famous for anecdotes. Actually, he immigrated from this region to Turkey as well and lived Akhisar city of Turkey. But he was born in this neighborhood, in this region. So, as you can see, there's a cultural affinity of the region and Turkish public in terms of shared anecdotes, shared stories, shared tales, etc. And it promotes. I'm from the very south of Turkey, Gaziantep. My mother did something like this. This is a very Indian gesture to say, I'm sorry, right? And this one. Well, it's interesting. There are a lot of people who immigrated from India or current Pakistan to Anatolia at these ages. If I show the picture of my mother, you will see a Pakistani, believe in me. My father is pure blondie because his ancestors immigrated from Turkmenistan. So we are really mixed. All immigration waves which poured into Anatolian geography during Selçuklus. Okay, we mostly discuss Ottomans, but I think the focus should be Selçuklus because when they built this empire, Selçuklus, all the publics in South Asia, Central Asia, well, they were able to move across the, region extending from Antalya city at the very southwest, Konya, and also Central Asia, including the current Pakistan, Bangladesh, and that's why there's a cultural affinity. And, well, it's something subliminal. The second issue that I have to delineate is about the Turkish independence war, especially regarding Indian Muslims, Afghanistan. Why? I had drafted an article and published in a journal, Perceptions of Turkish Foreign Ministries, academic publication under SAM, Strategic Research Center. You can read it, it's in the net. I searched Turkish-Afghan relations in 1920s, 30s, 40s, and I reviewed many primary resources from the archives of the then Prime Minister, now Turkish presidency. It's interesting. There's a story, and I have to pass it to understand why Turks have sympathy to Afghanistan case, or Pakistanis or Bangladeshis. The first issue is about the 3 officers, prisoners of war, captured by Russians, were sent to Siberia, I believe, and they fled. And they walked. There's a movie regarding, I think, a Western story, but we had the same story, and they were able to reach Afghanistan. And once they were in Kabul, they told their story to Kabul local security forces, and they took them to higher echelons, and then Amanullah Khan invited these 3 officers after having new clothing, etc., and gives a letter to be handed over to Kemal Atatürk. And this letter requests support to fight against Brits. And these 3 officers were sent to India because just remember, at that time, the transportation was through the naval lines. That means they had to have a ticket for a ship and then would sail to maybe Anatolia. I don't know exactly the route, But it took months. That's why this letter was handed over to Atatürk's office later. And think that during the same period, Turkey sent a delegation to Moscow to have an agreement against the Western Bloc because they had invaded Anatolia. And Afghanistan did the same thing. Amanullah Khan did the same thing. And the delegation of both countries, Afghanistan and Turkey, actually it was not Turkey at that time, Anatolian government, met each other in the hotel. I don't know why Russians, put all these delegations in the same hotel though. And it's in the memories of a delegation member. He tells, when we saw the other, well, first of all, our skin colors were the same, despite the Russians were pure white. This is his words, So both delegations approached each other. We tried to speak, didn't understand each other. Then one of us, Sami Bey, he was well aware of Persian language. He was speaking Persian language and communicated. And after then, they were authorized to sign a deal with any because their main agenda was to be recognized by another country. So that's why they were in Moscow. And Turkish delegation's quest was also the same. And first agreement that Anatolian government had was with Afghans in Moscow, 1921. And then Turkey had the letter from these 3 officers and sent what? It was Sakarya combat, which was really a disaster for Turks, even though Turkey had a victory. And Atatürk sent officers, professors to Afghanistan during the independence war. And Turks built, for instance, the Faculty of Law, medical faculty, some institutions. What was the reason? First thing, the perception here in South Asia was to save the caliphate. So they were not well aware of who Kemal Atatürk was, but they thought, the Indian Muslims, Afghans, thought that actually Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was fighting on behalf of Caliphate, Osmanlı Caliphate, Ottoman Caliphate. And think that there was a campaign here, and people collected gold, money, and sent it to Anatolian government to fight against the Westerners. It was the common enemy of them. I mean, Great Britain, France, and Greeks were receiving a great support from Great Britain, And once Atatürk, it's also in the memories of Atatürk, once Atatürk received the boxes with golds, he was shocked and appreciated it. But he said, okay, the motivation, because he was well aware of the intention of the other Muslim communities, what he said was interesting. Well, please keep it. Do not spare it or spend it. If our intention is to build a new country, not to have another caliphate, then we can return this gold, these boxes, to South Asia countries, somehow. If still they have a sympathy to our cause, then we can make use of this money to build the country. So that's why the basic industrial complexes of the early Republican term are built by Indian Muslim goals. I mean, for sure there were other resources, but think that Turkey was paying Ottoman debts up until 1954 per the Lausanne Treaty. So, Atatürk continues to send military and academic and political committees to support Afghan case. Right after the death, there was a change because, well, 1928 Amanullah Khan visit was really important because it was concluded by another agreement, and Atatürk recommended Amanullah Khan to build a modern Afghanistan. The day Amanullah Khan visited the Turkish parliament was the day the Turkish parliament was discussing alphabet reform, you know, converting alphabet from the Arabic letters into Latin. Well, Amanullah Khan unfortunately could not manage it. There's another story for this, but had to escape to Italy because he had an honored citizenship of Italy and then died. Right after then, there was a down in Turkish-Afghan relations, and it was not frozen, but at the lowest profile available up until 1960s, early 70s. Menderes government had paid a visit to Kabul, though. The relations were at the lowest profile, maybe up until Turkey was in Afghanistan under the head of NATO. Okay, this background took us somewhere. First of all, at the communal level, public level, there's a sympathy to Turks in Afghanistan. In Turkey, the political narrative is always based on brotherhood. I do not want to use, you know, male words, but this is what they say. So sorry for this. Sistership, let me say, and brotherhood. Okay? No, we have to be inclusive and think that Turkey perceives Afghanistan not on the basis of interest, benefit, having more in terms of privileges in economy or mining or etc. This is purely about inherited culture from the past. On the other hand, I have to confess one another thing. This is exactly in the words of Atatürk speaking to the parliament in the early 1920s. Another issue was to fight against the Great Britain, British soldiers. So British soldiers were the shared enemy of both Turkey, Indians, Indian Muslims, and also Afghans. So once you pledge a support to Afghanistan, also it's a challenge to Great Britain. But it was supplementary. The essential issue was about what? Mutual positive mood, positive emotion that would promote what? An interaction. Some scholars put Iran into this scale as well. I mean, Iranians have a strong tradition, especially state tradition. Well, Turkey does not perceive Iran as a barrier in communicating with Afghanistan, by the way. But there's a reality. Once Iranians are over there, and it was the Soviet term, there was no probability that Turkey can reach to Afghanistan or Indian Muslims other than Suez Canal. In this sense, the degree of cooperation, the degree of interaction was very limited. Well, during the NATO term, there's a very important issue. Last week, it was also on the agenda of Talibani members to promote Turkish-Afghan interaction relations. Turkey participated to the missions in Afghanistan with a clause, or how do you say, derogation. It's what? Turkey will not be involved in any combat mission. And that's why assumed civil-military cooperation to assist Afghan civilians, mainly in Kabul and then Wardak and Mazar-e-Sharif. I remember the US Army once, or the coalition once requested a Turkish helicopter to deploy a group of soldiers, and Turkey refused because it was a combat mission. And Turkey was in close contact with all parties. In Pakistan, for instance, Hikmet Çetin, the secretary of, or representative of NATO in Afghanistan, my PhD thesis actually covers this issue as well. He was in touch with Taliban at that time, just to negotiate for peace and reconciliation. So during NATO term, Turkey tried to facilitate Taliban, Afghan government, and also the other Western actors. Right after the collapse of Ghani government, the Turkish strategy was based on gradual approach. Why? Turkey, and still, did not know exactly how Taliban will form a government and treat Afghan people how. So there had to be a time frame that Turkey could observe what's going on in Afghanistan. The girls' education was a very important issue for Turkey, women's rights, and also what sort of ideology they will build, because we know the Taliban ideology, their system, but Turkey had to understand exactly what sort of ideology. Let me compare it with Syria, for instance. Ahmed al-Shara, the current president of Syrian government in Damascus, was once called as Jolani or Golani. Jolani is, Egyptian accent, and Golani is Syrian accent. They both are the same, actually. And he transformed himself into a much more moderate position. Now has a tie and appear before the TV cameras with his wife, and very inclusive and trying to interact with the others. So it was so fast. So Turkish approach was to first observe exactly what Taliban is planning, what sort of ideology they will try to establish. As a comparison again, Iranians started a revolution in 1979. Think that it was a revolution of, not Islamic revolution, but it was a revolution. There were Marxists, liberals, who started a protest, and Khomeini arrived in Tehran later, and then they expelled the other ideological or political currencies from the government. Maybe it took 1.5 years or 2 years. So you see, right after revolutions or coup d'etats or other great traumas in any country, we have to wait what happens next. Today, Turkey is much more prone to normalizing with Afghans. On the other hand, this normalization is about directly engaging with the public. Turkish Humanitarian Aid Agency, TİKA, Turkish Red Crescent, Turkish civil society organizations like IHH, it's one of the famous. They are in Afghanistan directly pledging grants to the students or assisting Afghan civilians, because still they are in deep need of humanitarian assistance. And economy is a really important problem right now, and they are trying to find opportunities in Afghanistan. Well, I will tell you at the end, though, let me just touch it. You know, this, I call TOPI, but I don't know how you pronounce it, TAPI project. There's a Turkmenistan, Pakistan, India project, and route Afghanistan's west. Yeah, pipeline. It's important. And Ashraf Ghani had proposed Lapis Lazuli. It was a connectivity project linking Afghanistan to Turkish market from Turkmenistan, Hazar Sea, or Caucasus, you know, Azerbaijan and Georgia, and then Anatolia, because Afghanistan needs it. And I believe that the next decade will focus on how to connect these markets, not only Afghanistan, but Central Asian countries and Pakistan, India maybe, and this country, I mean, to build an alternative other than Chinese Road and Belt Initiative. We need it. We need it. Well, regarding Pakistan, well, you know, first of all, whatever I say on Afghanistan applies on Pakistan as well. And I have to add another layer. It's the personality of the President Erdogan and the political thought he's representing. For sure, they are conservative. They value Islamic values. They value societal values. I mean, not purely on religion, but also inherited culture of the country. So that's why religion becomes one motivating factor, especially for him, in assessing the situation. But please don't forget something. Erdogan is really pragmatic. If he sees a danger to the benefits of country, he knows how to stop, or he knows how to step back from the original political position. That's why we discussed normalization of Turkey with the other countries. For instance, Emirates think that when Turkey was in Libya to support Tripoli government, it was the legitimate government. UAE's provided a great support to Khalifa Haftar, and Russian Wagner is still, you know, over there with a different name attached directly to Ministry of Defense. And think that Emirates was the essential actor funding all military assets or private military organizations or proxies for Haftar. So that's why Erdogan is not only focused on the values, but also the interests of the country. I mean, that's a reality. This is pragmatism. In this sense, Pakistan do have a different, how do you say, positioning in the mind of Erdogan and also the country. It's what, first of all, the inherited idea of this early period of Turkish Republic, the Indian Muslims' contribution to independence war is still in memories, and it's one input. The second thing, well, just check the history, please. Whenever a threat occurs, just remember the Soviet term. The West encouraged local regional pacts. You remember? And think that Turkey built a pact together with Iraq, Iran, and also Pakistan in history. That was in the frame of containment policy. Remember that. And the same applies right now. I mean, not to prevent any threat though, to have a regional ecosystem. So if the issue is twofold, I mean, security and prosperity, Turkish-Pakistani relations may promote these two quests. Why? Once you include Iran, or once you interact directly, the degree of opportunities are really high. And think that in each time Turkey faced a problem, like Cyprus, Caucasus, Azerbaijani-Armenian war, Pakistan was together with Azerbaijanis and also Turkey. I mean, you don't have to send soldiers or etc., but politically. That's why this not conditioned political support promotes the relation. And I have to also remind you one another thing. Pakistanis are really active in terms of persuading the other. The number of visits of Pakistanis are higher than, for instance, Indians. The number of Pakistanis sending delegations, you know, events held either in Pakistan or Ankara or Istanbul is really high. So they know how to start a political campaign by or through an indirect approach. This is another reality. So in this sense, yes, Turkey and Pakistan are very close. Recently, there was a discussion, especially in the media. It was about to build a Turkish, Pakistani, and Saudi Arabia pact. First of all, for sure, Turkey is cooperating with Pakistan in the frame of defense industries. And there are some spoiling effects, by the way. For instance, Turkey had sold Pakistan 30 attack helicopters, and Americans banned the engines. I mean, they did not sell it. Now Turkey is producing their own helicopter and aircraft engines. Most probably, Turkey will sell it in near future after they conclude their, tests. So, pact or alliance is different from coalition and different from defense cooperation. Turkey and Pakistan can cooperate, but it doesn't mean that they will build a pact. What I observe, Turkey may have individual defense and military cooperation with the other countries, maybe with India as well. I mean, no problem with this. But it doesn't mean that Turkey will defend Pakistan in case of war, because pact is different. There are some constraints on this. First of all, the geographical linkage is broken. So once you decide to support, well, we cannot make sure that Georgians or Armenians or Iranians will permit Turkish aircrafts reach Pakistan. I mean, so physically, I think there are some problems as well. On the other hand, think that if Saudis are building, and they built it with Pakistanis, it may have an agenda for sure. So Turks, I believe, will wait and see the situation first, and then will decide it, because Turkey is also a NATO member. So if you're a member of a pact, it's a political decision other than military, and NATO's reaction is also important. So I think we should not hurry. Okay. Let's go and visit India. It was 3 or 4 months ago, we had discussed this. We received an Indian delegation in Ankara as set a foundation. There were professors, diplomats, and for 2 days we discussed the relations of both countries in full extent. And I personally suggested them to have a second track diplomacy with Pakistan if they wanted. They rejected. And then we had another discussion, because we are a foundation and one of our duty is to start such sort of initiatives. We suggested again, my director repeated it, and then our former vice president, Fuat Oktay, the current head of Parliament's Foreign Policy Commission, suggested the same thing. And they said, maybe. It was positive, because after saying no, if you say yes, because they were actually under the embassy's guidance. I believe that they communicated. They said yes. We suggested the same thing to Pakistanis first. It was no, again. So, and then we witnessed this escalation, Pakistani-India escalation, and we have frozen our efforts. Maybe we should start it again. But please, let me just remind you one thing. Turkish-Indian relations are actually very, the potential is high. The trade volume right now is more than $7 billion, and it's favoring the Indian businessmen, not Turkish. Almost $6 billion are in the pockets of Indian businessmen or companies, like $1 billion, it's on us. But if you go through the Turkish-Pakistani trade volume, it's about $1 billion, maybe less. So you see, there's a great difference. So there's a potential. And India is a great market, and Turkey as well. Turkey and Pakistan are members of the 8 developing countries. Turkey and India are members of G20. But the political interaction is not at the desirable level. For instance, in 2025, there were 2 visits of Pakistani Prime Minister to Turkey and 1 visit of Turkish Foreign Minister to Pakistan. And during the international events, Prime Minister of Pakistan and Turkish leadership communicated a lot. Our Strategic Partnership Council Committee, they gathered a lot, Turkey and Pakistan. The Turkish-Indian Strategic Partnership Committee could not convene since 2014. It has been 12 years. Why? Is it political? I don't know. But I believe that if India and Pakistan have problems, maybe there must be a lessons learned from the Turkish case. Area of competition and area of cooperation are 2 different things. You can disagree on Kashmir. You can disagree on one significant issue, the Muslims living in India, for instance. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you will promote joint projects like taping. And Turkey may play a role in this. On the other hand, the degree of emotions in both parties are really high. As you have mentioned in your speech, dear Ivan, Turkish media did not reflect it, by the way. Only academics like me are aware of it, by the way. It's not in Turkish media. The Indian pledge to Armenians, well, it seems a bit challenging because they provided air defense assets, but Turkey does not perceive Armenia as a threat. Maybe Azerbaijan, but still it's at the risk level, not threat level. There are 3 categories: risk, potential threat, and threat. This is NATO literature. Risk means no capacity, no capability, but as an intention. Potential threat means no capability, but a bit intention, right? Intention. If this country has a capability other than intention, then a threat. So Armenia is not also a risk, Turkey, in terms of military. Well, diaspora is something more because we know that in Armenia, almost 6 million people are living. The diaspora is 7 million, and they are highly divided. I mean, diaspora and Armenia is totally different in terms of agenda. For instance, the ones living in the United States, Armenians do not understand the ones in Armenia. I mean, Eastern and Western Armenian are totally different in terms of dialect. But if India sells weapons to Armenia, first of all, it's natural because all countries do have the flexibility to procure any weapon from another country, no problem. But if you are intentionally selling it to promote something, well, then it will ignite another issue. It's what Turkey and Azerbaijan do have an agreement, like a defense pact, in 2022. If any attacks to Azerbaijan, Turkey will be involved in this war as well. I mean, it's an agreement, well signed. And Turkey and Greece do have problems, and India is now investing to Greece. And Dendias, the defense minister, is very harsh in terms of narratives against Turkey. And he said, okay, we will accept Indians as the most reliable partners. You can accept it, but if you suffer these words only to give a message to Turkey, it's nonsense. And Turkey, does not have any sort of either prejudice or bias towards the Indian engagement to these countries. They can have it. They are sovereign countries. But, the emotion is really high, but it's negative emotion. And Cyprus was another issue, maybe could be discussed because Kashmir and Cyprus are totally 2 different things. Cyprus issue in 1974 is something that has different characteristics if compared to Kashmir. What's the policy of Turkey regarding Kashmir? President Erdogan frankly said that, well, Kashmir Muslims are important. This is exactly what he said. Well, Turkey favors a referendum in Kashmir because it's a status quo, frozen right now. if both parties do not agree, and I believe that it's also on the paper on an agreement, there may be a referendum. So let Kashmir people decide on it. And if the Greek sentiment is about Cyprus and, resembling Cyprus and Kashmir issue, well, Turkey favored a referendum on Cyprus in 2004. It was Annan Plan, the General Secretary of the UN, and Turkey encouraged Turkish Cypriots to vote yes in favor of plan. Campaigned. Greek Cypriots campaigned no, even though they signed the agreement. That's another story. And think that 65 to 72% did not qualify. I mean, Turkish side yes, Greek Cypriots no, and did not qualify. And then Europeans accepted Greek Cypriots as a member to the EU. So think that now Greek Cypriots are representing the overall island in the EU. It's another story. So if it's about referendum, Turkey actually held it in Cyprus. I mean, together with the Turkish Cypriot government. Well, whatever the situation is, I believe, I think as a policy recommendation, please accept with my gratitude because it's not a challenging proposal. First of all, Pakistan and India are two countries of the region. For sure, they have problems, but could be resolved because there are no problems that cannot be resolved. It's one thing. Turkey may play a role in encouraging, facilitating, even though there are other actors much more dominant than Turkey. The US, for instance, China. And if it's to act with a negative emotion just to accuse the other party, I mean, the reaction of Turkey for such undertakings, well, tolerating and not that much on the agenda of Turkish leadership. You can't see any announcement of Turkish leadership on why Indians are selling weapons to Armenians. I mean, this is not our case. But Azerbaijan is a bit reactive on it. I mean, and there's one interesting contradiction. It's what? Now, Azerbaijan is cooperating with Israel. India is cooperating with Israel. It's interesting. But India is providing support to Armenia only since Pakistan suffered supportive sentiments to Azerbaijan. You see, it's an action and reaction cycle with also inconsistencies. I don't know why. So let me stop here. Maybe question period is much more important. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Well, in the interest of time, because we are running a little bit late, let me open the floor to questions. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. If you don't, I will ask a question. Imran, please.
Do I need the
Yes.
Thank you very much. Hoş geldin.
Sağ olun.
It's really nice to hear a conversation, a discussion about Turkey. I had the privilege a few years ago to visit Denizli,
Okay.
and I really enjoyed it. And I thought you put forward so many different threads of history, of Turkish domestic politics, also the cultural, religious and ethnic connections to South Asia, the diplomatic and the political connections, and I thought that was very interesting. One of the things, my question is probably more related to the first part of your talk, where you spoke about, some of the existential threats that Turkey faces, but also, the political turmoil in the last few decades with the coups, with the issues of security. I was curious to know how and you spoke a little bit about how religion is an important factor in Erdogan's foreign policy, but also kind of his politics. I was curious to know how has that context of having so many, being in a country in a state of turmoil for a while, and also facing these threats, how has that shaped Turkish ideas of itself and Turkish nationalism.
Okay, thank you.
So let us gather a couple of questions in the interest of time. So any other question?
Turkish interest in Bangladesh.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. So
Okay.
Turkish interest in Bangladesh. Any other question? Sandeep, please.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot about Turkey's policy. Couple of questions I had. One about, you spoke about how Turkey sees India's reaction. India's reaction to the whole operation, the conflict that India-Pakistan had, and how Indian media perceives what, at least in the general discourse, how in India it is portrayed what Turkey's role was, which was seen as very much supporting Pakistani side and has raised a lot of passions. My question is, was that a surprise? Was that something that took the Turkish establishment off guard, that there was such a strong reaction from India?
Okay.
Is it a surprising situation that you are in, unanticipated, or was this factored in, this was kind of anticipated, that this is how India will react?
Okay, thank you.
And the other question is this interesting policy that you talked about was the Asia Anew policy. How far does it extend? Does it extend up to Southeast Asia? And is it only economic, or are there other components to it? Are there Islamic component to it? Is there a cultural component to it? How is it? Could you unpack that a little bit?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and one other question that the colleague of ours just sent me. What is Turkey's interest in the Maldives? Because
Maldives,
there has been some defense cooperation and some Turkish interest. So what is it? Any other questions? Because probably we won't have another round of questions in terms of, because of time constraints.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, the Turkish history covering the latest 2 decades, as I said before, is really important because it changed everything. Okay, through an academic perspective, traumas and hopes are important. If you have a trauma, as I said during my speech in the workshop, it changes all normals. The former normals become anomaly. And hope motivates you. But traumas change the basics. In this sense, Turkey experienced, first of all, internal traumas and also external traumas. Some of them were really fast, some of them were gradual. For instance, PKK threat was a long-term one, and if you dedicate the lives of citizens like 44,000, it's something important. 9/11, it was more than 3,000 people, right? It was instant, and that's why impact was high. But the coverage of these 44,000 people, it was extended to 40 years. But every day, you hear some people died because of an attack. It's important. Another issue, for instance, Turkish-US relations. There were great ups and downs. Do you remember Obama's picture with Prime Minister deceased Ecevit? He had a baseball stick, right? And he delivered a picture speaking. And another one was, he was so comfort sitting on a couch, and Ecevit was so, actually personality Ecevit is so polite. He was so polite, a real gentleman. He was standing. So these pictures are not only indicators of the degree of relations, but later then, it created a great damage on Turkish perspective regarding the United States. And when Erdogan was in the government, the treatment of the other countries on Turkish politicians were a significant parameter to have a linkage with them. Okay? Reciprocity was really important for Erdogan. That's why the leaders, when they come together, please just notice, if one is sitting like this, another one sits. I mean, in Turkish culture, you can never sit. like this. Never, especially men. This is American way, right? We never sit. I mean, it's a disrespect. In Afghanistan, I had 2 different tours as military. I had never had sunglasses, because Afghan people perceive sunglasses as disrespect while talking to them. So it's important. This is a vulnerability. So Turkey perceived some events as a very existential one, either like trauma or a long-term developing crisis. PKK is a long-term one, but trauma, July 15 coup attempt. I believe that these internal developments also shaped the foreign policy. Think that you are exposed to a coup d'etat attempt and people who escaped, even though they are directly involved in this coup with weapons, former military or police officers, some judges, in some armored vehicles during the July 15 coup attempt, there were police officers and also former prosecutors or judges. It was interesting. And think that they have visas, green cards, work permits in the other countries. Some of them directly kill people. I mean, this is a reality. That's why these internal events shaped the foreign policy mood. So in each time Turkish leadership meets with a president or a high-level head of state or minister of state or etc., they raise some issues with an order. The first issue, that's important and very related to Asian policy again. Okay? First, trade and economy. In each time, Turkey has talks with Iran or Russia or etc. And if there's a press conference, President Erdogan talks first about the economy and trade relations of both countries, not terror threat or etc. And then he talks about the existential threats. The agenda usually covers Gulenists if they are active in this specific country, either in Africa or some Central Asian countries, etc. Yes, it does have an, but please, as I said before, Turkey is very skilled in terms of differentiating areas of cooperation, areas of competition. So Gulenists in the United States does not mean that Turkey will stop relations with the United States. Well, Turkey and Germany or France have problems in terms of assessing the situations, for instance, Syria, but Germany is the trade partner of Turkey, like more than $44 billion a year, and France the same. So, I mean, yes, existential threat is over there. Turkey may be reactive, maybe preemptive, but it doesn't mean that we will stop everything with the other countries. And I think India and Pakistan should have lessons learned from this policy. If you have a problem, okay, you can talk. On the field, there may be escalations, we perceive it, but there must be a communication channel. That's why you can manage it. It's crisis management. Regarding religion, the second question of you, Ibran, right? Yes. Well, Erdogan is coming from a tradition. He had his education in an Imam Hatip high school and values exactly the Muslim culture, Islamic culture, the traditions of people. On the other hand, he's really flexible in terms of treating the others. In this sense, I believe religions is a motivating factor for him. If there is an unjust treatment for especially like Myanmar Muslims, President Erdogan and especially his wife, Emine Erdogan, campaigned in favor of Myanmar Muslims. It's because if there are deprived over there, only because of their Muslim identity, for sure it's a vulnerability. It's something for them. On the other hand, they are not only framed by religion. I mean, Turkey is hosting the Greek Prime Minister today in Istanbul, and think that it was last year, for the whole year, despite normalization talks at the ministerial levels, Mitsotakis had complained Turkey in the United States to the lobbying companies, etc. And Turkey is still holding talks. I mean, it doesn't mean that we will stop everything with the Greeks. The same applies for Armenians. Now, Turkey is normalizing with Armenians. We had a deal in 2009. The Constitution Court of Armenia conditioned Turkish-Armenian normalization, as was signed on the paper, and it has stopped. And what happened? There was this war, and Turkey was actually providing support to Azerbaijan, but did not involve in the war. Did not invade Armenia, I mean, stopped. Just increased the measures across the border, and that's it. So religion is a factor, but not a great issue. For Bangladesh, Bangladesh is really a valuable partner for Turks. As I said before, in the frame of Indian Muslims, Bangladesh has a distinguished perception in Turkey's mind, Turks' mind. And why not to cooperate? I mean, if Bangladesh needs anything in terms of defense cooperation or industrial or economic, why not? I mean, Bangladesh is a market, Turkey is a market, and both can, promote it. And it's not at the expense of other countries. I mean, if you are two different sovereign nations, there may be relations. I'm combining the relations with Maldives to the discussion on Bangladesh. Please just be aware of one thing. If Turkey is selling weapons, ammunition, or other defense equipment to these countries, there's a system in Turkey. There's a system. It's what? If you are eager to buy it, you can go and bargain with the company. The company will for sure advertise the assets. Then we'll inform the ministry if this country is in the list that they can sell it or not. If it's in the list, they can keep continue. Because the list is continuously be updated. After they conclude the agreement, they should send the agreement to the ministry again with an end user. So the companies are in charge of negotiations. The government, especially the Ministry of Defense, is in charge of approval. And there are a lot of defense companies right now in Turkey, and they are eager to sell things, that's normal. If you don't sell it, somebody else will, this is another story. So Maldives with Muslim identity is for sure a great tourism destination. On the other hand, it's not pure defense or political for Turkey, but just a partnership as a country. I mean, if Turkey is selling some things, it's not to provoke, it's not to balance the region or etc. It's an act of companies, and if Maldives are in the list that are eligible to buy things from Turkey, no problem. Even Singapore can buy it. I mean, no problem with this. I will conclude it. Regarding India's perception on Turkey's role in the conflict, as I said before, the emotion is very high in the region. There were circulating reports at the very first day of the escalation that Turkey has sent a lot of weapons. No, I didn't hear it. And it was false. Either Pakistanis or Indians circulated a lot of information that were not correct through social media. And if any reads it, they believe, I don't know why, but it's rough information, so should not be exaggerated. And Turkey wasn't a party to the conflict, by the way, and did not deliver any weapon directly to change the course of the conflict, but it was Chinese aircrafts. On the other hand, yes, it was on the agenda of Turkish media that Indians are complaining. For sure, it's a news. I mean, on the other hand, Turkey did not, because it was a war or escalation between the two countries, and Turkey had nothing to do with this war. I mean, this is very crystal clear. Asia new policy is purely economic and trade. I mean, Turkey is very aware of the capacities and capabilities of Turks. I mean, politically, you can be here just to promote the partnership, have a support in the UN General Assembly, etc. But trade relations are much more important for Turkey. If you are out, you will lose it. So that's why.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Aswan. It's a pleasure having you here, and my apologies to everybody that will run a little bit late, but please join me in thanking the professor for his lecture.
Thank you. Thank you.